President George W. Bush began his second term in office after narrowly defeating Democratic contender and Senator of Massachusetts John Kerry in the presidential election of 2004. Bush's primary focus during his first term as president was on foreign relations following the September 11, 2001 attacks, but he managed to pass two important pieces of domestic legislation in education, the No Child Left Behind Act, and tax reform. Bush's second term would witness his focus shift back to domestic America as he tackled issues such as Medicare, Social Security, energy, and immigration. He was also forced to address the fledgling economy, the handling of Hurricane Katrina, and a questionable reshuffling of United States attorneys. Bush's domestic legislative agenda during his second term was a far-reaching effort to improve numerous aspects of the United States. The result was a balanced mix of success and failure. He prioritized Medicare and Social Security reform in order to provide benefits for more Americans. Prior to the election in 2003, Bush approved of the Medicare Modernization Act, which significantly altered the Medicare program. With the cost of prescription drugs rising rampantly, Bush was determined to introduce a program that lowered the cost of drugs for elderly Americans who struggled to cover the cost hike. The legislation created Medicare Part D, which allocated federal funds to control the cost of prescription drugs and insurance premiums. The program also encouraged corporations to continue to maintain reasonable health care costs for its retired beneficiaries. Bush ensured that the plan was passed through Congress and became active in January of 2006. In a similar effort to help senior Americans, Bush lobbied for an overhaul of the Social Security system because it was on the verge of financial collapse. Bush campaigned for legislation that allowed the federal government to privatize the system to a certain degree. He also called for personal Social Security accounts to be created to permit Americans to fund their own retirement, as well as a tax option that took a portion of Social Security tax payments and diverted them into insured investments. Bush faced significant opposition from both Congress and the public, especially with accusations that the funding of the president's foreign policy initiatives had been a reason for the depleted Social Security system. The large-scale opposition resulted in Bush's Social Security reform failing in Congress. Another issue that concerned the United States was immigration reform. During Bush's first term, illegal immigration from Mexico skyrocketed to unprecedented levels due to the oppressive conditions of the nation. Americans called for harsher immigration policies. Bush initially obliged by passing a bill to erect a massive 700-mile fence along the border of the United States and Mexico in 2006. Yet Bush understood the importance of migrant labor in the South and sought fair legislation that created an avenue toward citizenship for illegal immigrants. Bush rejected outright amnesty. Instead, he proposed a system that incrementally created a pathway toward legalization. Certain aspects of the legislation, formerly known as the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Act of 2007, included a guest worker program, the reforming of the green card application process, and the introduction of the diversity immigrant visa, which was simply a lottery system for obtaining a green card. The bill polarized both the Republican Party and American voters. The immigration reform legislation was rejected in the Senate in June 2007. Bush challenged the energy crisis of the 2000s by encouraging Congress to lift the ban on offshore drilling in the United States. With the price of oil and consequently gasoline skyrocketing during his administration, Bush sought to control the heightened price of black gold by reducing foreign imports and relying upon energy created domestically. While his crusade for increased drilling fell flat in Congress, he was able to commit several billions of dollars to a renewed focus on alternative energy. Bush wanted to reduce the carbon footprint of the United States and eliminate dangerous greenhouse gases by creating alternative fuel sources. His program aimed at appropriating funds to corporations and industries that invested in clean energy products. Bush faced severe criticism from a number of sides over three major issues during his second term: Hurricane Katrina, the economy, and the United States attorney's debacle. Hurricane Katrina smeared the legacy of the Bush administration. Hurricane Katrina was one of the largest and most powerful tropical storms to impact the United States, more specifically Louisiana and Mississippi. After obtaining advanced knowledge of the storm's potential impact, Bush authorized the Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Emergency Management Agency to mobilize. Unfortunately, both organizations failed to act quickly. The storm ravaged New Orleans, Louisiana on August 29, 2005. Recovery and emergency management teams only reached the beleaguered state on September 2nd. Americans blasted Bush for staffing two important emergency departments with incompetent leaders. He also faced sharp criticism over the amount of time that had lapsed between the landfall of Hurricane Katrina and the response of emergency personnel. Another condemnation against the Bush administration came when the United States Justice Department terminated 7 United States attorneys. Bush claimed that these individuals failed to fulfill their respective obligations, yet the United States Attorney General Alberto Gonzales and members of Congress believed that the terminations were the result of political maneuvering following the midterm elections. Gonzales and several remaining United States attorneys resigned out of protest. Congress opened an investigation into the matter and called upon several of Bush's personal aides to testify. Bush quickly used his executive powers to reject the congressional subpoenas. Tensions mounted between the president and Congress, but there was never any conclusive evidence that the original 7 United States attorneys were the byproduct of political maneuvering by the Bush administration. Congress, therefore, did not seek a criminal case against Bush. The American economy was the final major criticism against Bush. During Bush's second term, the economy began to plummet to lows not seen since the Depression era. The median household income decreased by several percent, the poverty rate increased, and the national debt had risen to a staggering $11 trillion. Eventually, the American housing market collapsed, oil prices skyrocketed, a subprime mortgage crisis arose, and the stock market sank. The United States entered the Great Recession in December 2007. Over the remaining year of Bush's presidency, over 2 million jobs were lost. Bush attempted to stem the tide of the crisis through bailouts, stimulation, and increased federal oversight, but many of his initiatives were too late. Financial institutions continued to collapse, and organizations such as Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were forced to be commandeered by the federal government to prevent complete economic anarchy. The failing economy, coupled with other major issues of Bush's second term, translated into a 37% approval rating by the time he left office. President George W. Bush entered his second term with confidence in his domestic agenda following the successful passage of tax reform legislation and the No Child Left Behind Act. Bush ensured that the Medicare Modernization Act was passed through Congress and enacted into law in January 2006. His other domestic endeavors fell short of his initial success. Social Security reform was rejected by Congress. The polarizing Comprehensive Immigration Reform Act of 2007 was squashed. Bush's energy policy received mixed reactions and token success. Bush's second term, however, witnessed several incidents that significantly impacted his approval ratings. The failure to mobilize emergency assistance following Hurricane Katrina, the Justice Department scandal, and the beginning of the Great Recession in 2007 dropped Bush's overall ratings to 37% at the time of his exit from office.